Hello and welcome to Maine's Natter with RJ, Transcending Imagined Differences. Today we're actually outside in beautiful South Portland. We thought we'd take this show outside and try this for the first time. So firstly I want to say you'll see people going by and things like that, and just entertain yourselves, and that's part of being outside as well. So what I'd like to do first is introduce my two guests. I have two this time round, and this is why we're outside as well. These two people I've worked with for about almost 2 years, I think, on a professional level, and I absolutely love the way that they work together and how their team is, and I wanted to kind of bring them onto the show. The first person I want to introduce to is Hanna, and the second is Baba. So please, Hanna, introduce yourself, and Baba.
Sure. So my name is Hanna DeAngelis, and I work with Refugees and Immigrants with Baba. We've worked together for 4.5 years or so. I'm originally from Reedfield, Maine. It's a small place between Augusta and Farmington.
Mm-hmm.
Went to a community area high school where my mom also went to that school. Very, all the generations.
Right.
Did a very classic Maine thing where I went to college here, left to go to Boston for a bit, and then came back because I love it here.
Mm-hmm.
And I live in Portland with my wife Aaliyah, who works in South Portland schools. And I've been colleagues for a while now, and have really worked together to build the team that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. So my name is Baba, and I am. I immigrated from Mauritania, which is in West Africa, and I know probably a lot of people may not know, in Maine where is Mauritania, but it is just near Senegal and Mali, around there.
Northern Africa.
But I am here for these last 7-8 years with my family, my wife, and my 3 little children. But before I come to the United States, I studied in Mauritania, and I have a science background, and I also studied in Europe.
All right.
For a master's degree in environment and sciences before I come to Maine. So now I'm working with refugees because myself, coming here with a lot of challenges that people who may leave their homes and for safety in general, the challenges that they face, and that's the reason why I'm working in that field with Hanna. And Hanna's, already said how long we've been we known each other, but generally most of my time in the U.S. I've been living in Maine.
Oh, right. Yes, yeah. Which is actually very similar, because I lived in Maine for the majority, something like 15 years, most of it. So traveled around, but interestingly coming back here and finding that I love it just as much. I also wanted to kind of talk about both of you. I'm very enamored of both of you and how you both work and how you work as well. But also how I really got introduced to kind of both of you. And it was a little bit of a, somebody finding me to volunteer and working, wasn't it? It was an interesting start.
Yes.
Very Mainey, very organic.
Yeah.
Because we wasn't quite sure how I could work or help you and your team, what part you can play.
Yep.
So I think we kind of played around for a year there. So yeah, do you remember that? Yeah, it's interesting.
We met you at a time that we were really working with our team we wanted to be a lot more cohesive and collaborative, and we were really working on group dynamic. About 3.5 years ago was when we started as co-leaders of our organization. So we got a lot more power from that, and we're able to make some more institutional changes that were important to us.
Exactly.
And making sure our team was a little bit more cohesive, kind to each other, collaborative, was a huge priority. So I think we met you almost exactly when that transition was happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember it was an article that you wrote on that time I think letter to editors on Press Herald, and we were reading it. Somebody brought it up and say, hey, do you know this person? I think because you are a black man, and then they were asking me if I knew you, and I say no, I don't.
You don't know how that cliche, that statement you just made, my friend.
But it was interesting that your perspective, because it was just a moment where the new U.S. government was elected, and then we were like, wow, so this person must be interesting in perspective of like having him in our team to help and support, because the fact that we work with immigrant and refugees, people of color in general, you might have something that really may be interesting for somebody who is trying to find their way in a very white Maine state, because your experience as a black man. And I think that's the reason why we wanted to really connect with you. And I remember that we emailed you right away, and then set up a tea, and then we talked, and then we say like, he's the person that we need.
And I say thank you, because it was if one thing about being coming here and coming from away is that it's hard to find a community of people and to find a sense of belonging. And I'd already moved from north, where I created that, so the Bangor, Belfast neck of the woods, and had to kind of move down here. And I did start here, but didn't have a network. And being a person who is black and a male and quite outspoken, it was hard to find that kind of diversity of people to be able to kind of fit in. So the mirror on that was very exciting, even though I didn't know how I could help, because you're quite a mechanical from the outside organization that needs to have things that the states and the government will give you so they can distribute that. But hearing about your particular organization and how in all organizations it's hard to have a bunch of very different people working together and recognizing the change over. So when I first came in, that's my job, is recognizing what works and what doesn't, harmonizes, is really noticing that the foundation of that. So it made me very excited to be like, all right, I'd love to be a part of that piece there. So so just kind of highlighting that as well. I wanted to kind of recognizing about the organization, I suppose, talking to both of you about how did you get there? How did you find this place? And I want to just highlight this, and a lot of my viewers probably will understand if you work in this the human services. It's in Maine. It's that it's hard, and you're in the weeds and in the brush, putting out the fires and trying to build and grow something. And often you'll just get a flare up of a fire or something, and you have to start again. And I don't care where you are. That's across the boards, in Maine with the resources you got. So I really wanted to ask, just what brought you in to doing such a challenging task, So Hanna, please.
Sure. So, like I said, I'm from Central Maine, and it was really important to me in moving back to Maine that I was going to do work that was absolutely rooted in my community, but also was very intentional about like, what is the role for white folks working with refugees? And so when I started in this position, I was in an administrative background support role. So I did a lot of record keeping and writing and behind the scenes work as I was learning more about refugees and immigrants in Maine. But it's extremely important to me as a white person from here to talk to other white folks about refugees. And make sure that we're becoming more and more of a welcoming state, kind of at every juncture we can. A lot of my work right now is education based, so traveling to Farmington or to Blue Hill or to Millinocket to talk about immigrants in Maine. But from my perspective of being from here, and that's really why I came towards it, is that I absolutely felt like I needed to talk to other white folks about immigration. And have stayed because our team is remarkable, and I love working with our team and learning from my colleagues. This is absolutely why I'm here.
Yeah.
You know, the last turbulent, I've only had this job in the Trump administration. So it's been a very turbulent time together. But yeah, we get to learn from each other all the time, which is definitely why I'm still here.
Right. And just to interject, you raise a really valid point about education and teaching of other people that look like you. Do you know? As a therapist, the amazing thing this year alone, with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matters and our present administration and the fragmentation of America, is I have more people of color, black people, coming in to do therapy. So just across the board, you'll hear this throughout different shows, black people don't go to therapy, and there's a long history about that, full stop. And suddenly to hear that perspective, one, as a human being and as a black man, but two, as a clinician. And those two marry together, but sometimes you have to kind of separate them because you've got to go down particular roads. But right there within the black community, there is a conversation that is going on and an energy around that, and wherever I go. So I just wanted to highlight that equally, to create change, it has to happen within the white community, particularly in a quite homogenous kind of society as Maine, community as Maine, that conversation needs to come across there, you know. So I just wanted to highlight that point because you make a good point there.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that, you know, Hanna's perspective coming to work with refugees as a white Mainer. You know, the interest that Hanna found, it's a similar interest that I found as a person who immigrated, you know, from Africa coming to the United States, and it was not really easy because I always say that when you leave your home and you come in, you know, with your intention to completely leave everything behind and then, you know, restart your life, it has to be really something very, very important and very, you know, significant. And that's the reason why when I came, you know, as a scientist, you know, having to do my master's degree, sometimes people may feel like, you know, I wasted my education because now I'm doing this job. But I think it's quite interesting to see when you go through like a lot of challenges and you recognize how it is hard and difficult. In the meantime, also, you see around you a lot of people who came at the same time, or, you know, very similar situation, but may not be as lucky as I am, as educated, coming here, you know, knowing how to speak English, how to write, and all of this educational background, but it still was too hard. And that was like, you know, driving me to say, I think I can help other people because I know there are a lot of things that a lot of people, you know, with in a similar situation or similar education, or most of them, what I see, they don't even have like a half of the education I have received. And it must be very, very difficult. So that's the reason why, you know, I came into this work, and Hanna is, you know, you recruited me. And I believe, you know, when we were doing, you know, the interviews and in the way how you kind of like, you know, I could read on your eyes, you know, like, you know, this is the person I'm looking for. Just because I was telling my stories, you know, how I came here, and then also how much I care about, you know, having people to be really integrated into this country and in Maine. So these are kind of things that make me really feel like this is exactly what I have to do. It's kind of mission, you know.
Oh, magnificent. Yeah. So purpose. You know, I'm going to join you on this one. You know, as a fellow black man from away, and speaking a different type of English, shall we say, to Americanism English, as people like to point out, it's about culture and acceptance, right?
Yes.
And part of that, and so part of your identity has just been to an extent left behind,
Yes.
and you've had to go somewhere to reform and create your identity, which is part of yourself as well as this, the new place that you're at. And so you've been in multiple places, not just coming straight over here. So there's a part of you that needs to be very dynamic and pushing forward all the time, because you're plonking yourself in new places, and there's a lot of new things that are coming at you, new codes, new cultural kind of identities that are coming at you. And there was a conversation you both were having just about how, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, about how you worked together, and about acknowledgement and recognition, affirming one another. And so as a black man, the one thing that I recognize is if I am acknowledged and if I'm not. And there's such a difference here with dominant white class compared to anyone that has pigment in their skin, or even gender to an extent as well, just as well, that it's important that we identify and acknowledge one another in many, many different ways. Do you know what I mean? So yeah.
I think that's also one thing that Hanna and I, when we start to work together, and I think also we recognize on each other, we have the same exact vision how we want to see the United States and Maine in terms of diversity and accepting, and also me being a person who may be subject of being rejected, but you being a person who is supposed to be receiving and accepting. So bringing this together, I think that was really quite interesting, for you and me to collaborate in different ways, because we always kind of ask you, what do you think about this? If I would do this like this, what would you think about it? Or how white people would think about this? Because I don't know how white people will react about me as a black person, my perspective. And that was quite interesting. And then also you always ask me, what do you think about this? If I would react like this, as black person, how other black people or immigrant would react, or would this hurt their feelings? So I think that was kind of really quite two different perspectives, but working in a way that's for the same goal.
Absolutely. And I think some of the first work we were doing together was traveling around rural Maine and giving presentations. So we had to very quickly have conversations that were what are we going to do when this happens? If we encounter this moment of racism, how are we going to handle it? What words do we want to use? How are we naming racism when we see it when we inevitably see it in our workplace, but also when we go into these intentional teaching spaces? What are our two roles? How are we going to talk about our own identities? We had a lot of those conversations right up front.
Absolutely.
Really right away.
Absolutely.
Because we had to, because we were also in public.
Exactly.
Talking about them. And so I think that we made a lot of choices right away about also how we were going to use our identities to explain to folks how we work together. And also why we approach things differently.
Exactly. And also, I remember always when we're going to kind of present and you say, Baba, do you have 5 minutes to talk? Just even before right away, or better the situation that we may be encountering, and then you will say, this might be a little bit tough. If you don't feel comfortable, you may choose to not go. Or if you don't feel comfortable in the middle of the training, you can leave if you want to.
Nonetheless, what you're talking about, I want to link this, is about how you both collaborate to come to a consensus, so that you both come up with an idea of how you're going to move forward. And I'm not leaving away. I don't want to move away too much from how you two do this, but I want to speak just a little bit about how that very modeling that you do is what you do with your team. Right, that is what's evident when I come and see you, and how you both think about and communicate with your team. Particularly before the COVID, where we were sitting down, you could really see how you both would do that. And not diminishing what you have to say or yourselves or your positions, but not taking up space either. So when needed to, you would speak up, but when needed to, you'd also quiet them down, so
Yeah.
you'd give them space. So
Absolutely.
the very things that you're talking about that right now about what you do with each other,
Yep.
you equally do with your team.
Absolutely.
And so they do it with each other. Yeah.
I think that was kind of like the thing I learned a lot from Hanna, and I believe that you always tell me that you learned a lot from me, was like, leaving out all of kind of like, hierarchy, even if like Hanna is my boss, but I never feel like, she's my boss, because I feel so comfortable. She's giving me that space, to feel comfortable and never fear that there would be a backlash if I say something that may not be feeling comfortable, or that she may not like.
Yeah. Can I give an example of that? So I think one of the ways we do that with our team, but modeled with each other, is we talk a lot about how our identities influence our decision making and like how we present to our team. So for example, at the beginning of the Trump administration, I had to give bad news almost every staff meeting, like people being fired, like really hard news. And you gave me the feedback once that basically when I cry in front of the team, it changes the entire dynamic to be completely centered around me. Absolutely. Because I'm a young white woman.
Yes.
And it like centered my feelings and also shifted the dynamic to be one of caring for Hanna instead of caring for the team. So you were a really good coach to me in that, of just thinking about how we could acknowledge it was hard, but that my presentation had to be one of like full courageous, we can do this in order for us to like meet our strategic goal.
Exactly. And also, I think it's about a culture. It's about like, where people come from. A lot of time, people may feel it's important to show emotions, but in some cultures, emotions may not be like that important, because you want to show the courage, what you're facing, that you're not like, letting yourself down. So it's completely different perspective. And I think that was really, interesting. But in the meantime, also, an example of what I learned from you is always like, when you tell me during a meeting, if I feel like, I'm being attacked, or I'm being like, because I'm black, sometimes I may be subject of like, racial prejudices, and it's very hurtful. Sometimes, I tend to just react, but, telling me, now, if you feel not comfortable, you can always leave. Giving me the permission to feel comfortable to leave a meeting, or to not react right now, but let's talk after the meeting, or let's talk tomorrow about this. Just kind of like giving me that like a diffusion of all of the negativity. I think that was really something quite interesting in terms of like co-leaders. How we learn from each other.
And I think we modeled both that like emotions are okay to talk about, and we have to be talking about our identities and how they impact us in front of our team, which is I think a big part of why we are where we are in terms of team collaboration and folks caring for each other, because people talk about the challenges they have from being a parent, or serving someone that has a similar immigration story to them that's very painful, or different ways that our beliefs around sexual orientation impact our work, for example. So I think that we model just like being direct and brave about the ways we are all showing up to work, though. All the time.
Brilliant. I again, what you both are doing in that sense is allowing each other to honor your emotions. So many a times where I've worked in the past, that wasn't allowed. And so I always felt unheard and entrapped. So that's not, when I say honoring emotions, it's not to say that you're allowed to do anything, but that what you're feeling is valid. That it has a place. Let's think about how you want to do that so that you can honor you, but at the same time not kind of disrupt or change a dynamic, because it doesn't help a situation.
And I think also that's what I always say, like be allowed to feel vulnerable, because we all vulnerable at some point. Depending, whether it's about our race, it's about our sexual orientation or religion, we feel vulnerable. And that vulnerability, because in many spaces or workplaces, when you feel or you show vulnerability, it may be taken against you,
Yep.
you know.
Right.
But that's where we feel like, you are giving that permission that somebody can feel vulnerable without feeling that it might be taken against themselves.
Right,
So
right.
Yeah.
I think that was really powerful thing that's we allow ourselves and also allow the staff so
Right.
that people can always be themselves without feeling that backlash.
On your emotions, yeah.
Yeah.
Because this is what I'm talking about, is
Yeah.
about the very thing that you're doing is the structure that you need for working with other humans.
Yes.
So it's that compassion, that understanding, that holding,
Yeah.
so that you do that with the most vulnerable people,
Yeah.
so that when they are figuring out whether to trust you or not, your very presence and the way that
Exactly.
you are models that no, we are sincere people and we want
Yeah.
to help you the best that we
Exactly.
can. And that's the piece that comes around, even when there's a language barrier.
Yep.
Right, so that's the piece that you're saying. So I wanna spread it out a little bit, because there's so much that we could talk
Yeah.
about just right there, and it's like treacle for me. But what benefits have you seen and challenges have you seen in the space of a minute or so with your team, with the way that you're working together? So what has happened,
Sure. So our team is extremely diverse in a number of ways.
Yeah.
I think folks are from 10 different countries.
Mhm.
We're from the ages of, I think, 21 to 73.
Right.
Many different educational backgrounds. And I think that sometimes the challenges are from folks, right, the different identities and experiences they're bringing to the table. A lot of times it's just about communication. But I think that people right now are at a place where they really care about each other as family and always choose to collaborate first, because we acknowledge collaboration. It's like the thing we give feedback about over everything else is like when folks work together.
Yep.
And I think that we model it
Yep.
really, like we often speak as we.
Right. Yeah.
Which makes a huge difference. And we've made a lot of spaces, like even working with you and doing some group work with our team.
Right.
I think that's been a huge deal for folks, and just
Yeah.
having time together that is not always about work.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, the human
And
aspect.
also the acknowledgement, for example, what we do every week, like, giving kudos to people, when people feel like their work are important
Right.
and it's coming from their supervisors,
Right.
and also focusing on more positive outcome than, little mistakes that people may make because of the differences. I think that's really what we see right now, bringing everybody together.
Yeah. So I'll just stop you here, just as there's time here. It's perfect. But I want to really say thank you to both of you. And for myself, my little part that I do is talking to your staff and being a person that can support them and continue that same message that you're doing right there, and it clarifies it for me. And to close, my thoughts on that is we recognize a program that has a very difficult task with lots of very different people, but are learning how to work together. And that's really the story of America, is that everybody's from somewhere and they have to figure out how we work together. And so I wanted to show this example of what that looks like. So thank you, and please join us again for our next show. And if you'd like to know more or learn more at all, please do contact us, and I'll put you in touch with some people from here. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining me in this show.